Ambassador Jonathan Hayes had attended enough diplomatic ceremonies to understand that traditional royal selection processes in alien cultures usually involved either excessive pageantry, unpredictable legal complications, or both. Standing in the magnificent palace of stars on Asteria Prime, watching Princess Zara Velnathi preside over what appeared to be an elaborate courtship ritual, he was beginning to suspect today would involve all three. The grand selection ceremony of Princess Zara Velnathi, announced the court herald with the kind of formal dignity that made military protocol look casual, will now commence according to ancient law and honored tradition. Jonathan adjusted his formal diplomatic attire, noting that his human ceremonial dress looked distinctly modest compared to the elaborate robes worn by Asterian nobles, whose rank insignia seemed to incorporate actual starlight. The Palace of Stars itself was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture that captured and amplified the light from Asteria Prime's twin suns, creating an environment that felt more like standing inside a living gemstone than a conventional building. "Ambassador Hayes," whispered Dr. Sarah Chen, the human xenocultural specialist whose presence ensured that diplomatic observers understood the significance of what they were witnessing. "The selection ceremony is one of the most important political events in the Asterian calendar. Princess Zara's choice of consort will influence commercial and military alliances throughout this sector of space. Any particular protocols I should be aware of?" Jonathan asked, studying the assembled crowd of potential suitors, whose elaborate presentations suggested they'd been preparing for this opportunity for years. "Observe respectfully, maintain diplomatic neutrality, and absolutely do not participate in any ceremonial activities unless specifically invited by royal authority." The ceremony itself proved more complex than Jonathan had anticipated, involving multiple phases where potential suitors from various noble houses presented their credentials, while Princess Zara evaluated their suitability according to criteria that seemed to emphasize political advantage over personal compatibility. Princess Zara herself was strikingly beautiful, with silver hair that seemed to capture light in impossible ways and violet eyes that suggested intelligence far beyond her apparent age, though her pointed ears and subtle luminescence marked her as unmistakably Asterian. "Lord Thainkar of House Velthani," announced the herald as the first suitor approached the royal platform, "offers alliance through marriage, bringing extensive military resources and territorial holdings spanning 4 star systems." Princess Zara studied the elaborately dressed noble whose presentation emphasized wealth and power rather than personal qualities. "Lord Thainkar, what is your commitment to protecting Asterian civilian populations during times of conflict?" "Your Highness, military strength ensures that conflicts remain brief and decisive, minimizing overall casualties through superior force projection. And your position on refugee assistance for displaced populations." Displaced populations are regrettable consequences of necessary military operations. Resources are better allocated to preventing conflicts than managing their aftermath. Jonathan noticed Princess Zara's expression tight, almost imperceptibly, though she maintained perfect royal composure as Lord Thainkar concluded his presentation with elaborate bows and formal declarations of devotion that sounded more like corporate merger proposals than romantic overtures. The pattern continued through multiple suitors, each offering impressive credential while carefully avoiding substantive commitments to the humanitarian concerns that Princess Zara raised with increasing directness. Jonathan found himself growing irritated by the obvious political calculations involved, where each potential consort seemed more interested in the commercial advantages of royal marriage than in the princess herself. "Duke Velkorath of the Outer Territories," announced the herald, "offers alliance through marriage, bringing control of strategic shipping routes and exclusive mining rights to 17 planetary systems." Duke Velkorath, Princess Zara said with carefully controlled patience. What is your understanding of the consort witness responsibilities regarding evacuation network authorization? Your Highness, such technical matters are best handled by qualified administrative personnel. Royal authority should focus on strategic oversight rather than operational details. You consider civilian evacuation to be a technical matter rather than a royal responsibility. I consider efficient delegation to be essential for effective governance, Your Highness. Jonathan watched Princess Zara's composure begin to crack as suitor after suitor offered elaborate presentations, while dodging every question about actual responsibility for protecting the people they would theoretically serve. The ceremony felt less like courtship and more like a political auction where the princess was being evaluated as a commodity rather than recognized as a person deserving genuine partnership. Prince Kesvara of the Central Worlds, the herald continued, offers alliance through marriage, bringing technological resources and research facilities capable of advancing Asterian military capabilities. Prince Kesvara, Princess Zara said, her voice carrying undertones that Jonathan's diplomatic training recognized as barely controlled frustration. In your view, what obligations would consort witness status create regarding humanitarian assistance to non-Asterian populations? Your Highness, royal resources are most effectively utilized serving Asterian interests. Humanitarian assistance to other species should be contingent on strategic advantage and reciprocal benefits. So refugee assistance should be conditional on political utility. All royal policies should serve Asterian strategic interests, Your Highness. The ceremony continued in the same pattern. Elaborate presentations followed by diplomatic evasions that revealed fundamental unwillingness to accept the responsibilities that Princess Zara obviously considered essential to royal partnership. Jonathan found himself increasingly sympathetic to her obvious frustration as potential consort after potential consort, demonstrated that they viewed marriage to her as a business opportunity rather than a personal commitment. Finally, after the last suitor had completed his presentation with the same mixture of political calculation and personal indifference that characterized all the others, Princess Zara rose from her throne with an expression that mixed royal dignity with genuine desperation. "Honored court," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline walls of the palace resonate with emotional undertones. "I have heard offerings of wealth, territory, and strategic advantage. I have heard proposals that treat royal marriage as commercial transaction and humanitarian responsibility as optional convenience." She paused, looking around the assembled court with an expression that sought genuine partnership rather than political calculation. "Is there no one brave enough to marry me?" Princess Zara challenged, her voice carrying both royal authority and personal vulnerability. "No one willing to accept responsibility for protecting those who need protection, regardless of their species or political utility. No one prepared to honor the true obligations of consort witness status, rather than treating royal partnership as opportunity for personal advancement." The question hung in the air like a challenge that would reshape everything about Asterian politics and interspecies relations. The assembled suitors looked uncomfortable, their elaborate presentations apparently inadequate for addressing the princess's direct questions about actual responsibility and genuine commitment. Jonathan felt something shift in his understanding as he realized that Princess Zara wasn't just frustrated by political manipulation. She was genuinely seeking someone who would accept responsibility for protecting vulnerable populations, rather than exploiting royal authority for personal gain. "Your Highness," Jonathan heard himself saying as he stepped forward from the diplomatic observation area, "I would be honored to accept that responsibility." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to collapse nearby star systems. But Jonathan was focused on Princess Zara's expression of shock mixed with something that might have been hope, as she realized that someone had finally responded to her challenge, with a commitment to actual service, rather than personal advantage. He had no way of knowing that his impulsive response to what he perceived as a genuine plea for partnership had just activated ancient Asterian bonding protocols that would either save both their civilizations or destroy his quiet diplomatic career in the most spectacular fashion possible. The silence following Jonathan's declaration stretched for what felt like geological epochs before erupting into the kind of chaos usually reserved for natural disasters or major treaty violations. Princess Zara stared at him with an expression that mixed shock with something that might have been relief, while the assembled court began urgent whispered conversations that suggested his response had triggered complications no one had anticipated. Ambassador Hayes, Elder Kesvar announced with the tone of someone trying to prevent a diplomatic catastrophe while maintaining ceremonial dignity. You have activated the Tel Nathi Corvith, the ancient bonding protocol that creates irrevocable legal connections between the princess and anyone who formally accepts her marriage challenge. The what protocol? Jonathan asked, though he suspected he really didn't want to know the answer. The Tel Nathi Corvith is not a casual response to royal inquiry, Princess Zara said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was processing implications as rapidly as he was. According to ancient law, your formal acceptance creates immediate consort witness bonds that cannot be dissolved without proper ceremony. Jonathan looked around the Palace of Stars at faces representing one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, all of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from fascination to barely controlled panic. Your Highness, I should probably mention that my diplomatic training covered cultural observation protocols rather than participation in alien marriage ceremonies. If I've accidentally violated some sort of royal protocol— You have not violated protocol, Elder Kesvar interrupted. You have activated it. The Tel Nathi Corvith grants you immediate legal standing as Princess Zara's consort witness, with shared authority over evacuation networks, diplomatic codes, and military coordination systems. Shared authority over what systems? Systems that control refugee assistance, humanitarian aid distribution, and defensive coordination throughout the Asterian Empire, Princess Zara explained, though her expression suggested she was still processing the implications of his unexpected response. Jonathan, may I call you Jonathan? Your acceptance has given you access to classified networks that most Asterian nobles spend decades trying to influence. Dr. Chen stepped forward with the expression of someone whose careful diplomatic observation had just been comprehensively derailed by unprecedented events. Ambassador Hayes, we need immediate consultation with Earth Colonial Administration regarding the legal implications of— Dr. Chen, Princess Zara interrupted gently. The Tel Nathi Corvith supersedes external diplomatic authorities. Jonathan's acceptance creates binding obligations under Asterian law that cannot be overruled by human governmental decisions. So I'm legally married to an alien princess and have access to military systems that could influence the balance of power between our species? Jonathan asked, trying to process information that made his previous diplomatic challenges seem like relaxing vacation activities. You are legally bound as consort witness, which is more complex than simple marriage, Princess Zara corrected. The bond grants shared authority over humanitarian networks while creating permanent biological and political connections that will affect every decision you make for the rest of your extended lifespan. Extended lifespan. Asterian longevity transfers through formal bonding. You will live for centuries, during which you will share responsibility for governing an empire that serves dozens of species across multiple star systems. Jonathan felt the weight of accidental responsibility settling around him like gravity from a much larger planet. Your Highness, when you asked if anyone was brave enough to marry you, I thought you were seeking someone willing to accept the responsibilities of royal partnership. I didn't realize I was volunteering for centuries of interstellar governance. I was seeking exactly that, Princess Zara replied, her voice carrying genuine warmth for the first time since the ceremony began. Someone prepared to accept responsibility for protecting vulnerable populations rather than exploiting royal authority for personal advantage. Your response suggests you understood the true question being asked. Elder Kesvar activated holographic displays that showed the scope of systems now accessible through their linked biometrics. The Tel-Nathi Corvith has granted you joint authority over evacuation protocols that can transport displaced populations to safety, defensive networks that can protect settlements without escalating to military conflict, and communication systems that allow coordination between species whose governments have been artificially prevented from cooperating. Artificially prevented how? Princess Zara exchanged glances with Elder Kesvar before responding. Jonathan, my unmarried status has been deliberately maintained by entities that profit from political instability and uncertain succession. Corporate interests from both our species have been manipulating the selection ceremony to ensure that I remained available for political negotiations, rather than gaining the authority that consort witness status would provide. You're saying someone's been sabotaging your marriage prospects for political advantage. Multiple someones from both species, Elder Kesvar confirmed. Human defense contractors who wanted to prevent Asterian humanitarian networks from undermining their operations. Asterian military industrialists who profit from the kind of conflicts that evacuation assistance might prevent, and shadow organizations that benefit from keeping both our governments focused on artificial tensions rather than cooperative solutions. Jonathan studied the intelligence displays, recognizing economic warfare patterns from his diplomatic training. They've been maintaining artificial conflicts to justify defense spending, while preventing the kind of cooperation that would make large-scale military operations unnecessary. Exactly. And your unexpected acceptance of the Tel-Nathi Corvith has disrupted years of careful manipulation by granting us authority to activate systems that serve civilian protection rather than military-industrial profit margins. A priority alert echoed through the palace chambers, indicating incoming communications that carried the kind of urgency usually reserved for interstellar emergencies. Director Walsh's image materialized in the ceremonial hall, her expression suggesting she was dealing with what she considered an act of diplomatic treason, requiring immediate correction. Ambassador Hayes, you will disavow any commitments made under alien law and report for immediate extraction and debriefing. Director Walsh, Jonathan replied carefully, I have accepted responsibility for humanitarian assistance that serves both human and Asterian civilian populations. I don't see how that constitutes a violation of human interests. You have accepted alien political authority that grants you access to classified military systems and creates permanent obligations to foreign governmental structures. You will dissolve this connection immediately. Director Walsh, Princess Zara interjected, her voice carrying harmonics that made the palace's crystalline walls resonate with royal authority. The Tel-Nathi Corvith cannot be dissolved through external pressure. Any attempt to remove Jonathan from Asterian territory will be considered an act of war. Your Highness, Ambassador Hayes is a human citizen whose security clearances have been compromised by foreign influence. We have jurisdiction over our own personnel. Jonathan felt something shift in his awareness, enhanced perception that revealed tactical information about forces mobilizing around the palace, while providing access to defensive systems he didn't understand but somehow knew how to operate. Director Walsh, he said, processing intelligence through their shared consciousness, I notice you've positioned military assets around the royal palace. That suggests this conversation isn't really about diplomatic protocol. That suggests, Princess Zara added, accessing data through their linked systems. That Director Walsh represents the same interests that have been preventing the Tel-Nathi Corvith from being activated legitimately. The displays updated to show corporate security forces coordinating with Asterian separatist factions, revealing the scope of conspiracy that had been manipulating both their governments to prevent exactly the kind of cooperation that their bond now made possible. They're not here to extract me for security review, Jonathan realized. They're here to eliminate both of us before we can activate evacuation systems that would interfere with profitable conflicts and refugee exploitation. Director Walsh, Princess Zara said formally, you have 1 hour to withdraw your forces from Asterian sovereign territory before defensive protocols are activated. Your Highness, we are prepared to use necessary force to prevent security breaches that threaten both our species' strategic interests. Whose strategic interests? Jonathan asked, feeling anger override diplomatic caution. The interests of people who profit from keeping displaced populations trapped in exploitable situations, or the interests of those who believe humanitarian assistance should serve people who need help rather than corporate entities that profit from preventing it. As the communication ended and defensive systems began preparing for the most important ceremony of their lives, Jonathan reflected that his diplomatic career had taught him to build bridges between cultures, but the Tel-Nathi Corvith was about to teach him to build sanctuaries that transcended political boundaries. He was beginning to suspect that responding to Princess Zara's challenge had been either the most important impulse of his career or the most spectacular failure of diplomatic judgment in human history. The emergency session of the Joint Diplomatic Council convened in a secure chamber beneath the Palace of Stars, where representatives from both civilizations could address the crisis of a human ambassador who had accidentally gained access to some of the most classified systems in the Asterian Empire, while legally binding himself to an alien princess, whose marriage was supposed to be carefully negotiated through established political channels. Ambassador Hayes, began General Morrison, whose presence indicated that Jonathan's situation had attracted attention from Earth's highest military commands. You've created a diplomatic situation that threatens to destabilize carefully maintained balance between human and Asterian interests. General Morrison, Jonathan replied, his voice now carrying harmonics that allowed both species to understand him without translation equipment. I've accepted responsibility for humanitarian assistance that serves both our people's civilian populations. I'm not sure how that threatens anyone's legitimate interests. It threatens interests that depend on maintaining artificial scarcities and controlled conflicts, Princess Zara added, activating displays that showed the true scope of their situation. The Tel-Nathi Corvith has revealed systematic coordination between extremist factions from both species who profit from preventing the kind of cooperation that our bond now makes possible. Elder Kesvar highlighted intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture of coordination between entities that should have been opposing each other. Corporate defense contractors from both civilizations have been collaborating to ensure that humanitarian assistance remains insufficient, maintaining exploitable refugee populations while justifying increased military spending. You're suggesting that our own defense contractors have been working with alien interests to maintain profitable conflicts? General Morrison asked. We're proving it, Jonathan said, accessing evidence through their shared consciousness. Communication logs, financial records, and operational plans showing coordinated manipulation of both our governments to prevent the kind of cooperation that would make large-scale warfare economically impossible. Dr. Chen studied the intelligence displays with growing concern. Ambassador Hayes, your access to these systems has revealed information that could reshape our understanding of interspecies relations. But using this intelligence will make you a target for every organization that profits from the current arrangement. Dr. Chen, Princess Zara said. The Telnathi Corvith exists specifically to ensure that humanitarian authority serves civilian protection rather than corporate profit margins. Jonathan's acceptance of consort witness responsibilities grants us the authority to activate evacuation networks regardless of the political inconvenience they create, and the long-term implications of this bonding. General Morrison asked, centuries of shared responsibility for governing systems that serve dozens of species, enhanced capabilities that allow coordination of defensive operations beyond conventional detection, and permanent commitment to ensuring that civilian protection takes precedence over military-industrial interests. Jonathan replied, feeling the weight of authority that came with access to networks designed to serve refugees rather than exploit them. A priority communication alert interrupted their analysis. War Chief Thankar's image materialized in the chamber, his expression suggesting he was dealing with what he considered a contamination of Asterian royal bloodlines requiring immediate correction. Princess Zara, you have violated centuries of tradition by accepting a human consort witness. The royal bloodline must be preserved from alien contamination. War Chief Thankar, Princess Zara replied with royal authority. The Telnathi Corvith has been activated according to ancient law. Jonathan has proven his commitment to protecting vulnerable populations rather than exploiting royal authority for personal gain. His species represents a threat to Asterian genetic and cultural purity. The bond must be dissolved before further contamination occurs. Jonathan felt something shift in his enhanced awareness as he recognized the tactical situation developing around the palace. War Chief Thankar, I notice your forces are coordinating with human corporate security teams. That seems like an unusual alliance for someone concerned about preserving Asterian independence. Our mutual interests align regarding the need to prevent unauthorized interspecies bonding that threatens both our people's security. Mutual interests that apparently include maintaining profitable conflicts while preventing humanitarian assistance that would interfere with refugee exploitation. Princess Zara added, broadcasting evidence that revealed the scope of coordination between supposed enemies. The intelligence displays updated to show financial transfers, coordinated operations, and communication logs proving that traditionalist factions from both species had been working together to prevent exactly the kind of cooperation that the Telnathi Corvith now made possible. This changes everything, Dr. Chen said quietly, studying data that revealed decades of systematic manipulation. This changes everything only if we have the authority to act on it, Jonathan corrected. The Telnathi Corvith grants us that authority, but using it will make us targets for every entity that profits from keeping our peoples in artificial conflict. Then we use it effectively, Princess Zara said, and the defensive capabilities operate completely outside normal detection methods, Dr. Chen added. These systems could prevent conflicts by making conventional military escalation irrelevant to civilian protection. The conspiracy's exposure triggered immediate and dramatic results. Corporate security forces found their operations suspended as evidence revealed their coordination with supposed enemies, while military contractors discovered that their threat assessments had been systematically manipulated by entities that profited from maintaining artificial tensions. Warning, announced the palace's ancient AI, speaking in harmonics that predated human spaceflight, multiple hostile forces attempting to breach royal defensive barriers. Protective protocols recommend immediate formal bonding ceremony to legitimize consort witness authority. How long do we have? Jonathan asked, processing tactical information through their enhanced awareness. Approximately 2 hours before coordinated assault forces can overcome palace defenses, Princess Zara replied. But the formal Telnathi Corvith ceremony requires only 30 minutes to complete. And if we complete it, then we gain permanent authority to coordinate humanitarian systems, while making ourselves permanent targets for every entity that profits from preventing interspecies cooperation. Jonathan looked around the chamber at faces representing civilizations whose cooperation could reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Understanding that his choice would determine whether the evidence they'd gathered would be used to serve civilian protection or be suppressed by forces that viewed refugee assistance as a threat to profitable instability. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "I came to this ceremony as a diplomatic observer, expecting to witness a routine political marriage negotiation. Instead, I found someone genuinely seeking partnership to serve humanitarian purposes rather than personal advantage." "And your response?" "My response is that some responsibilities are worth accepting regardless of the personal consequences. If the Telnathi Corvith grants us authority to activate systems that serve people who need help, then completing the ceremony is our duty to those people, regardless of what it costs us personally." As they prepared for the most important ceremony of their lives, while hostile forces coordinated assault plans against the palace's defensive systems, Jonathan reflected that his diplomatic career had taught him to build bridges between cultures. But the Telnathi Corvith was teaching him to build sanctuaries that transcended political boundaries. He was beginning to suspect that stepping forward when others hesitated had been either the most important impulse of his lifetime or the most elaborate form of humanitarian heroism ever disguised as diplomatic accident. The formal Telnathi Corvith ceremony took place in the Palace of Stars' most sacred chamber, where ancient Asterian technology created a ceremonial space that seemed to exist partially outside normal dimensional constraints. Jonathan knelt beside Princess Zara before an altar that pulsed with organic light, while above them, defensive systems repelled coordinated assault attempts by corporate security forces and traditionalist factions who wanted to prevent humanitarian authority from being permanently established. "Are you certain about this?" Princess Zara asked, taking his hands as quantum resonance fields began building around them. "Because the formal Telnathi Corvith creates permanent biological and legal connections that will affect every decision you make for centuries to come." "I'm about as certain as someone can be about voluntarily accepting permanent responsibility for humanitarian networks spanning multiple star systems, while corporate armies try to prevent refugee assistance from reaching people who need help," Jonathan replied, attempting to maintain some perspective in a situation that felt like standing at the crossroads of galactic history. "Though I should probably mention that my experience with alien bonding ceremonies is limited to diplomatic observation, which I suspect isn't particularly relevant to actual participation. The reality involves considerably more quantum resonance and considerably less diplomatic protocol than standard ceremonial observation," Princess Zara assured him, activating crystalline apparatus that would formalize their legal and biological connection. "Though the commitment to humanitarian service is exactly what the ceremony is designed to test." Elder Kesvar began the ceremonial incantations, his voice harmonizing with quantum fields that made the chamber's walls pulse with inner light, while defensive systems continued repelling assault forces above them. "Do you, Princess Zara Velnathi, accept the bond of Telnathi Corvith with Jonathan Hayes, knowing that this choice will intertwine your fates across all challenges to come?" "I do," Princess Zara said, her voice steady despite the sounds of combat echoing through the palace's upper levels. "And I promise to honor his humanity while granting him authority over Asterian humanitarian systems, to support his decisions regarding refugee assistance, and to never use our bond for political advantage that would compromise his principles or our people's welfare." "And do you, Jonathan Hayes, accept the bond of Telnathi Corvith with Princess Zara Velnathi, understanding that you accept not just personal partnership, but responsibility for the welfare of millions of beings across dozens of worlds?" Jonathan looked into Princess Zara's violet eyes, seeing determination mixed with vulnerability and trust that went beyond anything he'd experienced in his diplomatic career. I do. And I promise to honor Asterian traditions while maintaining my commitment to humanitarian principles, to use our shared authority to serve those who need protection rather than those who profit from their suffering, and to never forget that the most important diplomatic achievements are measured in lives saved rather than treaties signed. The chamber filled with harmonics as quantum resonance fields activated, creating biological and legal bonds that transcended species barriers. Jonathan felt reality shift around him as Princess Zara's consciousness touched his own, not invasive, but like gaining access to awareness he hadn't known existed. Knowledge flowed between them, her memories of growing up with the weight of royal responsibility, while watching humanitarian crises that political manipulation prevented her from addressing. His experiences building bridges between cultures whose differences had seemed insurmountable, until cooperation revealed shared interests in civilian protection. Her understanding of interstellar politics merged with his practical knowledge of diplomatic solutions, creating shared perspective that neither could have achieved alone. But more than expanded awareness, he felt fundamental changes in his biology, enhanced capabilities that would allow him to coordinate evacuation operations across vast distances, improved physical resilience that would be essential for someone whose responsibilities might span centuries, and direct access to command systems that had been waiting for exactly this kind of authorization. The ceremony's completion triggered automatic activation of the Asterian evacuation networks throughout the frontier sectors. Ancient transportation systems came online that could move refugee populations to safety faster than corporate forces could coordinate suppression efforts, while communication networks broadcast the conspiracy evidence to every major oversight body in both civilizations. "Warning," announced the chamber's ancient AI. "Evacuation network activation detected by hostile monitoring systems. Corporate assault forces attempting final breach of ceremonial chambers." Let them come," Jonathan said, feeling abilities he was still learning to control. They came here expecting to eliminate two individuals who threatened their profitable operations. Instead, they're facing consort witnesses with access to defensive systems that were designed to protect humanitarian networks against exactly this kind of interference. The final confrontation was brief and decisive. Corporate security forces and traditionalist assault teams found themselves facing not just enhanced Asterian capabilities, but automated defensive systems that had been specifically designed to protect humanitarian operations against military interference. Their weapons malfunctioned, their communications were jammed, and their assault equipment was systematically disabled by technologies that treated profit-motivated attacks on refugee assistance as irrelevant to civilian protection protocols. "This is impossible," Director Walsh's voice crackled through damaged communication equipment as her forces retreated in disorder. "No individual bond should have this level of defensive authority." "Director Walsh," Jonathan replied, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through the evacuation network's communication systems. "You're not dealing with individual authority anymore. You're dealing with consort witnesses who have access to systems designed to ensure that humanitarian assistance serves people rather than profit margins." The conspiracy's exposure triggered investigations throughout both civilizations, revealing the scope of coordination between corporate and military entities. The conspiracy's exposure triggered investigations throughout both civilizations, revealing the scope of coordination between corporate and military entities that had been systematically preventing humanitarian assistance while maintaining exploitable refugee populations. The evacuation networks, once activated, operated autonomously to transport displaced families to safety, while broadcasting evidence that made suppression impossible. War Chief Thankar's voice echoed through the damaged communication systems, carrying the tone of someone whose carefully constructed alliance had just collapsed spectacularly. This interference with natural selection processes violates the fundamental principles of species development. War Chief Thankar, Princess Zara replied through their shared consciousness. Helping people reach safety violates no principles except those that profit from keeping vulnerable populations trapped in exploitable situations. The automated defensive systems continued their work, systematically documenting the corporate traditionalist alliance while providing evidence to oversight bodies that could no longer ignore proof of systematic manipulation spanning decades. 6 months later, Consort Witness Ambassador Jonathan Hayes Velnathy stood in the Joint Coordination Center that had been established to manage the permanent integration of human and Asterian humanitarian systems. The hyphenated name had been Princess Zara's suggestion, representing the new form of existence they'd created together, neither purely human nor traditionally Asterian, but something designed specifically to serve evacuation networks that transcended political boundaries. The Telnathi Corvith had evolved beyond its original purpose, becoming less about royal succession and more about shared responsibility for ensuring that ancient promises of sanctuary remained available to anyone fleeing persecution, exploitation, or corporate control. Jonathan's diplomatic experience had expanded to include coordination of refugee assistance across vast distances, while his enhanced capabilities allowed him to work tirelessly maintaining systems that ordinary human physiology couldn't sustain. "Any regrets?" Princess Zara asked, joining him at the coordination displays where transport routes showed constant movement of families reaching safety through networks that had been waiting centuries for proper authorization. "Well," Jonathan said thoughtfully, "I do miss the simplicity of diplomatic observation, where the most complex decision was whether to take notes during ceremonial proceedings or trust that the official transcripts would capture important cultural nuances. As opposed to serving as immortal consort witness to alien royalty, while coordinating evacuation networks that span dozens of star systems and maintaining humanitarian relationships with beings whose biology ranges from aquatic to crystalline." Jonathan pulled her closer, marveling at how natural it felt to share consciousness with someone whose people he'd been trained to see as fundamentally alien just months ago. "Though I have to say, the enhanced awareness has some unexpected benefits, such as being able to sense when refugee populations need assistance before the crises become visible to conventional monitoring systems. It's much more effective to prevent humanitarian disasters than to respond to them after they've already caused suffering. And the extended lifespan, remarkably useful for developing the kind of long-term relationships that make interspecies cooperation sustainable across centuries, rather than just diplomatic terms." Jonathan grinned, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came with using enhanced diplomatic skills for purposes that actually mattered. "Plus, it gives us time to really perfect these evacuation protocols. Though it does mean centuries of shared responsibility for maintaining sanctuary networks that serve beings we may never meet personally. Minor detail. We've got quantum evacuation systems, enhanced consciousness linking, and joint authority over humanitarian networks that can transport entire populations to safety. How hard can galactic refugee assistance coordination be?" Princess Zara's laugh carried harmonics that resonated through the coordination center's quantum systems, creating ripple effects that enhanced the efficiency of operations throughout the network. "Jonathan, your optimism remains one of your most endearing human characteristics." "My optimism and my apparently unique willingness to step forward when alien princesses ask if anyone's brave enough to accept humanitarian responsibilities. That was the most fortunate diplomatic impulse in recorded history." As they stood together monitoring evacuation operations that served refugee populations across multiple star systems, Jonathan reflected on the strange turns his diplomatic career had taken. He'd started as an ambassador trained to build bridges between cultures, but the Telnathi Corvith had taught him to build sanctuaries that transcended political boundaries. The conspiracy they'd exposed had been completely dismantled, its architects facing justice, while the artificial barriers they'd maintained gave way to genuine cooperation. Evacuation networks now operated as permanent infrastructure, using combined human and Asterian resources to provide assistance that neither species could have managed alone. "There's something I should tell you," Princess Zara said, her mental voice carrying harmonics of excitement mixed with anticipation. "More cosmic responsibilities I haven't discovered yet. More opportunities. The evacuation networks we've activated don't just serve this sector. They connect to similar systems maintained by other species throughout the galaxy. We're part of a much larger network of beings who have chosen to dedicate their extended lifespans to protecting displaced populations rather than exploiting them." Jonathan considered this revelation. So not only did we accidentally become the most important humanitarian partnership in local space, we're also part of a galactic network of refugee assistance operations. Essentially, yes. The Telnathi Corvith can interface with similar bonding protocols maintained by dozens of species, whose cultures include permanent commitments to civilian protection. "No pressure at all," Jonathan said with a grin. "Just the responsibility for coordinating refugee assistance across multiple galaxies, while maintaining cooperative relationships with beings whose idea of routine humanitarian work involves manipulating stellar radiation patterns to create habitable zones for displaced populations. We could start with the Andromedan emergency relocation protocols," Princess Zara suggested helpfully. "They've been requesting assistance with volcanic evacuation procedures on 17 of their agricultural worlds." Volcanic evacuation coordination, galactic humanitarian networks, centuries-long diplomatic partnerships with alien royalty whose idea of routine ceremony involves quantum consciousness bonding. Jonathan nodded slowly. "You know, 6 months ago I would have asked whether you were serious. Now, I'm just wondering whether we need to pack special equipment for coordinating with beings whose biology involves controlled geological manipulation." The Andromedians are quite practical, actually, and they have excellent disaster response protocols. I think you'll appreciate their approach to large-scale population protection. Will there be more chances for me to accidentally reshape galactic politics through impulsive responses to alien royal marriage challenges? "Almost certainly." "Perfect. I was getting bored with simply preventing interstellar conflicts through quantum consciousness sharing with alien princesses." As their coordination center managed another successful evacuation, this time carrying families away from corporate resource extraction operations to worlds where they could rebuild their lives without exploitation, Jonathan reflected that his diplomatic career had taught him to build bridges between cultures, but the Telnathi Corvith had taught him to build relationships that made bridges unnecessary. The ability to step forward when others hesitated had led him to the most important responsibility of any lifetime, ensuring that ancient promises of sanctuary remained available to anyone who needed them, regardless of what political boundaries they needed to cross or what species they belonged to. "Zara," he said, watching another transport full of refugees emerge safely from hyperspace, "I think this might be the most important diplomatic ceremony I've ever had the privilege to participate in. Even though it began with you completely misunderstanding the legal implications of responding to royal marriage challenges. Especially because...
Porte même pas le grain.
Exactement. Mais qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par des gens différents, là?
Non, mais c'est diversifié. À Québec, on voit vraiment pas beaucoup de...
Je comprends.
Il y a beaucoup d'ethnicités, il y a beaucoup de types de personnes aussi. À Québec, c'est vraiment, tu sais, c'est straight, beaucoup, je trouve. Tu sais, puis ça change rien, mais c'est cool parce que ça fait beaucoup de... Tu sais, c'est comme...
Non, je comprends. Plus de culture, genre plus de...
Puis aussi l'anglais, là. Genre, je sais
Ouais.
jamais quand parler en anglais ou quand parler français, là. Pour moi, je parle tout le temps français, là. Fait que quand j'arrive... Hey, mon gros front, là! Montréal, je trouve les gens sont pressés.
Non! On aime la vie en été. Juste en été.
Mais là, par contre, le vent, il do me dirty, là. On voit mon gros crâne.
Non, il faut dire machallah, c'est
Des
joli.
gens différents. Non, mais là, brother, je suis pas en train de dire... C'est vrai qu'il y a il y a plein de types de gens.
La manière dont tu l'as dit, moi, ça.
Il y a des gens pas normaux.
Baudouin!
follow, Baudouin.
W!
J'ai vu des Lego de Pokémon au Costco. Yo, that's crazy. Lexa, ton Discord, je veux bien t'aider pour ton setup stream. Crime, brother. Yo, Peter, let's go, what's up? Grosse BM. Grosse BM, les gars. Hey, il fait tellement venteux, là.
Venteux. Ouais.
Mais en vrai, Didi, elle serait-tu down de venir